with weeks 7 and 8 of The Artist's Way. I know I'm sometimes taking a little longer than a week to do a week in here, but life happens, so I am still moving along though. So week 7 is about recovering a sense of connection. And the first thing they talk about is listening, and how inspiration and getting creative ideas isn't so much about thinking things up, it's more about listening. And I would say that I find that to be true. I feel like there's times where ideas just sort of, it's almost like they come to you. And so it's not so much about making them up, it's about listening for those ideas and kind of letting them percolate a little bit in your mind. And then they talk about perfectionism, which is something that I think a lot of creative type of people struggle with. You have this image in your mind of how you want it to be, but making it come out on the paper, like if you're drawing or if you're making music, doesn't always quite translate. And I think sometimes we tinker with things so much, we can lose the essence of things, and we need to know when is the time to like let it go is good enough. And I think perfectionism also causes us to avoid things. It's like, if I can't write the perfect story or make the perfect picture or write the perfect song, I'm not going to do it. And that can really hold us back. Like, done is better than perfect is the saying, and that is so true. And then it talks about risk and taking risks and how scary that can be. And sometimes, you know, you don't have to, again, it goes back to perfectionism. What would you do if you didn't have to do it perfectly? Or what would you do if you didn't know that you could fail? And so just sometimes we have to take that chance, and we have to just go out there. And what would we do if we didn't have to do it perfectly? What if it was okay to just have fun? And I think that's a problem that a lot of adults get caught up in, is when we're kids, we don't expect things to be perfect. We just try things because they're fun and we want to do them. And then when we're adults, it's like, well, I've got to be instantly good at this, instead of just letting ourselves have fun to try something, which, you know, can be kind of a problem. And then it talks about jealousy, and especially in our artistic realm, we might look at something and go, well, why is that person getting so much attention? Their stuff isn't even that good. You know, we may say things like that to ourselves. And what this shows us, it shows us wherever we're jealous is that we want something about that. And that it's not like a pie where there's only limited pieces to go around with creativity. Like, just because someone else is doing well doesn't mean that you can also do well. And that's one thing I really loved about when I went to art school, is that, you know, there can be like 12 of us in a room making a painting of something, but they all look different, and they're all have their own unique voice and their own unique way of saying things. So, you know, it's just because someone else is doing something that you want to do doesn't mean that you don't have something to add to that conversation as well. And then it gets you to write a whole bunch of things about what you liked as a kid and what you felt like as a kid. Like, did you, you know, if you had had the perfect childhood and the most supportive parents, what would you have turned out to be? And, you know, what you kind of lacked as a kid, and how you can reparent yourself to give yourself some of those things that you would have really liked. Like, for example, when I was a kid, I really wanted, you know, like piano lessons or dance lessons, and I never got them. First of all, I lived in a small town that didn't really have those options, but also I don't think my parents could afford it either. So those are something I really, really loved. And, you know, now that I'm an adult, you know, I've taken dance classes and I've done some music lessons and things like that. So, you know, how can you reparent yourself as a kid or as an adult, you know, with some of the things that you missed out on when you were a kid? And then, let's see, that's pretty much for week 7. And then week 8 is about recovering a sense of strength, so a sense of resiliency. And it talks about survival and how, you know, sometimes we have to face, we have to survive losses. You know, there's, you know, the story maybe that didn't get published that you wanted, or, you know, you wanted to get into an art show and you didn't get in, or, you know, the band you left, or, you know, things like that, that there's always these losses in an artistic life, and we don't always talk about them and talk about, you know, some of the grief that goes with it and how that's normal, and that you can always, there's always something you've learned from each loss, and there's always something that you can do to move forward with it. And then they talk about how academic circles aren't always conducive for creativity. You know, when I was in university, I was in art school, and I have to say, for the most part, it was pretty supportive. There were some artists who've looked down on other artists if they thought that their art was too like pop art. I remember we had a guy who did these amazing sketches. He did every day on the bus. They were like fantasy sketches, and there was like a teacher who kind of poo-pooed it, like that's not real art. And I think that was really damaging. And you know, I think that's messages like that sometimes in academic circles can really squash an artist. Luckily now that guy's still making that kind of stuff, which is great. So it didn't, you know, it obviously didn't deter him from doing that, which is great, because he's a really good artist. But, you know, some of these attitudes, you know, especially when you're a young artist and you're just learning, can be kind of damaging, instead of just letting your voice develop and be whatever it's going to be. And that doesn't just happen with visual arts. I mean, I'm sure it happens in music and in writing, that in academic circles, unless you write a certain way or play a certain way, it's like, well, that's not real. And that can be damaging for people. And I wouldn't discourage people from doing those things in university, because like I said, for the most part, most of the people that I went to university with and teachers and stuff were very supportive. But I know sometimes there are people who aren't. And so, you know, that can be something that we may have to be resilient against. Also, gain disguised as loss, which goes back to the whole loss thing and survival, is that every time something ends, there's a new beginning. So, you know, we may make a terrible painting or write a story we're not so happy with, but we learn something from that, and we can move forward with it in order to make something better in the future. And then product and process, how our society is really focused on the end product. And as artists, it's not our job to predict how people are going to react to the art that we are making. So our job is to make the art that we've been called to make, and to leave it to others to decide what they think of it. And that can be a really hard thing, because we live in a society that is totally product focused, very consumer focused, and very much wants people to be instantly great, and doesn't see all the time and process that went into making the art that people love. So people don't, you know, they think, you know, an actress or a musician is instantly successful, and they don't see all the hard work that went up into making that person the way that they are. And we have to focus as artists on the process and not worry about what the end result is, because that's what the universe gets to decide. We just need to make the art that we've been called to make, which, you know, sometimes, you know, we get caught up in wanting things to be like, well, what's the end product going to be? And then filling the form, which means showing up every day to make your art, which means showing up every day, every week to make your art. Again, that goes back to process, and you're supposed to show up and do it. So just get on with the business of doing it. And that there's a lot less, you know, we always think of, you know, artists as very dramatic and stuff, but if we just show up every day and do what we need to do, then, you know, there's not a lot of drama in that. And, you know, that can actually bring you a lot of peace to just show up and do your art every day. So then they talk about early patternings and some of the early messages we were given, perhaps as artists. I mean, I don't know about you, but in this society, there's not a lot of positive messages given to young creative people, that's for sure. And how we can counteract that with affirmations. I mean, I know I was brought up where art was like, oh, that's a nice hobby, dear, but it's not seen as like a legitimate career or, you know, something that is always supported. And I think that's true for a lot of people growing up as artists. And, you know, sometimes, you know, you may be lucky enough to be born into a family where people are artistic themselves and support that. But not everybody's family's like that. My family's not terribly artistic, and they just kind of didn't get it. And that doesn't make them bad people. It just means that their interests lie elsewhere, and I don't think I really knew how to support it, because it just was something outside of their sphere entirely. So, you know, not everyone is lucky enough to grow up with that. So if you are a creative person whose parents or family support you, that's awesome, and you should totally give them kudos and say thank you for that. That's what my advice is. So that was week 7 and 8. I'm going to be working on week 9 next week, and hopefully we'll have it up for you next Saturday, which is recovering a sense of compassion, which is my word for the year and what I am working with this year. So I'm looking forward to that. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you're kind of going along with this if you are working on this book. Let me know what you think, kind of what you kind of issues or things came up during weeks 7 and 8 for you. Like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.